Robinson Crusoe is a book about uncontrollable passion. Crusoe, throughout the book, basically just gets thrashed around and beaten up by the sea, but always comes back for the prospect of adventure. His decisions aren't always rational, but he seems to never be able to settle down and live a normal life. That is what his father wanted him to do, introduced early in the book by his father's lectures telling him how the poor people suffered and the rich people had envy and other problems of their own, so the middle-class life was perfect, and that's what he wanted Crusoe to pursue. However, Crusoe decided he would go to sea, and the very first voyage he took turned out to be terrible. There was one storm at the very beginning that was horrible for Crusoe because it was his first experience on a ship, so he was seasick. The next day, the waters were calm, but they stalled for 8 days without wind. And after those 8 days, a legendary storm overtook the ship, which frightened even the most experienced sailors. So Crusoe experienced 2 horrible disasters in only his first voyage. When the sailors were finally rescued and made it back to shore, Crusoe reflected on the wickedness of his decision to disobey his father. On the shore, one man told him that if on his very first voyage he experienced such a horrific experience, that he was not destined to go to sea, and he should give up on the sea life forever. However, he quickly found another journey to the coast of New Guinea, where he turned 40 pounds into 300 pounds by trading with the natives. This was essentially Crusoe's only successful journey, because after this, the captain of that ship died, and Crusoe decided to take the ship for himself and sail back to the coast. However, on their way, they got attacked by pirates, and Crusoe became the slave of the captain. Crusoe spent a few years as a slave, and this could be considered his exposure to the poor life. He was a good fisherman for his master, and one day when his master sent him out to catch fish for a feast, he took the ship and sailed away. On that ship, there was one man whom he threw overboard, and another boy named Xury, who he kept as his servant. Xury and Crusoe sailed along the coast for a long time, waving and making signs to the natives, and watching all the wild animals attack each other. However, they didn't really know what to do with themselves, so eventually they saw a ship sailing and flagged it down, sailed over to them. In talking to the generous captain of the ship, Crusoe regretfully sold Xury for money along with many of his other possessions, but it actually gave him quite a bounty. The captain then delivered him to a coast where Crusoe started a very successful plantation, but lived in isolation. This portion of the book, although brief, could be considered Crusoe's exposure to the high-class life that his father had told him about. He quickly grew weary and bored, and set out on a voyage for slaves, where again the sea thrashed him. All the men on his voyage died except for him, who ended up washed up on a sandy island, all alone. Crusoe was very distraught and pouty at the beginning of all this. However, he quickly composed himself and started to scavenge the wreck of the ship for what he could. He got many useful things out of it, such as the sails and the planks, gunpowder and clothing, and he then proceeded to go and build a habitation for himself. He made a small house with a fence and a table and a chair, which he loved dearly, and a cave for storage. He killed animals and eventually planted crops, and his religious faith came and went until he had a kind of religious awakening while smoking tobacco when he was sick. He began to consider everything good that had happened to him as opposed to seeing the evil, such as the fact that he was the only one out of his entire crew that survived the wreck. He initially loathed his isolation from humanity, but began to become thankful to God for letting him live. He began to read the Bible regularly and found a kind of Garden of Eden on the other side of the island, which symbolized religious imagery. He did many things on the island, tamed animals, explored, tried to build a canoe, which he couldn't get into the water. And eventually, one day, he found a footprint in the sand, which scared him horribly, and he stayed in his house for about 2 years. He saw piles of human bones from where the cannibals had feasted, and eventually saw the cannibals, as well as a Spanish ship that wrecked off the coast. He resourcefully gathered from the Spanish ship, and Crusoe saved a savage from cannibalism. He called this savage Friday, and Friday quickly became very useful to Crusoe. The two worked together to attack savages that came to their island with more prisoners to eat, and one of those prisoners that they saved was actually Friday's father. They saved another man, and Crusoe began to act like a king of his domain. The 3 people now living on the island built up their provisions so that they could sail to the mainland and rescue all the captives of the cannibals. While they were waiting for their crops to grow and goats to breed, an English ship showed up off the coast, and it turned out that it was a crew that had mutinied on its captain, and the captain, first mate, and a passenger were taken prisoner. Crusoe helped the original captain regain control of his ship, and he helped Crusoe sail back to his home. When he returned, he found that most of his family was dead, but that he still had plenty of money from his plantation that was very successful. He denied 2 opportunities to go out to sea on voyages, and both of those ships became lost at sea. After having a horrible time traveling by land and almost being devoured by wolves, Crusoe decided that he preferred the sea life. He tried to settle down one more time, got married, and had kids, but soon grew restless, and he sold his plantation for a profit, and traveled back to his colony by ship to see how his island was doing, and after that he went on plenty more adventures, which he said he detailed in a later account. The interesting part about Robinson Crusoe is the abusive relationship between Robinson Crusoe and the ocean, and how he keeps coming back to it. It's something set in his mind that he is obsessed with, that he cannot control. His very first voyage thrashed him, yet he continued and continued and continued, and even in the end of the book, he tried to settle down and get married, but he couldn't help himself and ended up going back to the adventurous life. There's other themes in the book. There's a religious imagery. It's interesting how his big religious realization happens only when he's smoking tobacco. He admits to having no faith in God initially, and slowly as his circumstances worsened, he became more and more reliant on Providence. Thank you for watching.